If I had to point to one game from the now previous generation as my absolute favorite, I would say Control, without any hesitation. From the psychedelic, mind-bending visuals, the 20th century office building architecture, and, of course, the fast-paced action that allows you to weaponize the space around you, Control just felt so unlike any third-person shooter in such a long time. When putting this video together, my first instinct was to do a full review, like I usually do, but I wasn't sure what I could say about the game's structure and what I did or didn't like that hadn't already been said, especially when a friend of mine did that job for me back in the summer, so check that out. So instead of a lengthy review, I want to instead talk about something that I think other people have missed. And it's the fact that Control is a meta-commentary of its developer, Remedy Entertainment, reflecting on their past, present, and future. Now, before we jump into dissecting my gigabrained observations, I think it's important to set the stage by outlining just who and what Remedy is and how we got to this point. Remedy Entertainment is a Finnish developer with 25 years of experience making explosive third-person shooters. What separated Remedy from other iconic shooter developers of the past like id Software, 3D Realms, and Epic Games was their focus not just on action and graphical innovations, but on high-quality cinematic storytelling, of which their 2001 mega-hit Max Payne set the bar for. Now, of course, Max Payne was not the first story-heavy shooter, but how it presented itself was unique, and its mainstream success showed to the industry that intense action and great writing didn't have to be mutually exclusive. The tremendous success of Max Payne at such an early stage in Remedy's history put them in a position where future titles not only had to live up to that expectation, but also had to fit the mold it created. Now, on the surface, this seems pretty obvious, right? Plenty of major, long-standing development studios have spent years iterating on their previous successes. But what makes Remedy's case unique is that, 1, they never did a lot of sequels, 2, they stuck to the Max Payne formula of a third-person shooter with a gimmick for a surprisingly long time, and 3, there were huge, very abnormal gaps of time between their releases. Max Payne 2's development began almost immediately after the first and released just about a year or so later. But the time between Max Payne 2 and their next title, Alan Wake, was nearly 7 years, and the time between Alan Wake and Quantum Break was 6. Now, if you wanted to be pedantic, you'd point out that there were a bunch of smaller titles in between Alan Wake and Quantum Break, such as Alan Wake's American Nightmare and 2 other phone games, but I think it's pretty obvious where the company's focus was at the time. This amounts to 4 major releases within the span of 15 years and a little over 2 console generations, or 3 depending on how you want to count it. Now, yes, quality absolutely matters more than quantity, but you didn't have to go very far to find other studios, especially those that specialized in shooters, that had more frequent and consistent output. Between 2001 and 2016, Bungie released Halos 1, 2, 3, and Reach, left Microsoft, created the first Destiny, and its 2 major expansions, The Taken King and Rise of Iron. Okay, so before anyone angrily comments at me, I do want to make some clarifications with these examples. So initially, I didn't want to include Halo 3 ODST as it was never intended to have been a full-price game and didn't have as many resources going into it like other Bungie titles. But then I realized that, by that logic, The Taken King and Rise of Iron also shouldn't be counted either, as they're also like expansion packs for Destiny. You could probably make the argument that they also introduce a lot more to the game aside from just content, but whatever. I figured whatever, for consistency's sake, you can pretend ODST is on this list, but regardless, I think the point is pretty clear. Epic Games released Unreal Tournament 2003, 2004, and Unreal Tournament 3, the first 4 Gears of War games, and Bulletstorm, while also working on 3 iterations of the Unreal Engine. DICE was hard at work on the Battlefield series alongside other racing games such as the Rally Sport series and Midtown Madness 3 for Microsoft for the Xbox, and of course the beautiful first-person parkour title Mirror's Edge. Over the course of 15 years, the gaming industry underwent numerous changes, trends, highs, and lows, all of which kinda just passed Remedy by. When Max Payne came out in 2001, there wasn't any shooter, first or third person, quite like it. But when Quantum Break released in 2016, story-driven third-person games inspired by movies and TV shows were a dime a dozen. And that's not even getting into how many games have cribbed Max Payne's slow-mo feature. So, in other words, by 2016, Remedy Entertainment was, well, they were in a bit of a rut. Their games were taking increasingly long to get out the door, and while critic and audience reception remained somewhat high, the sales weren't justifying the increasing budgets. Interest from gamers were shifting to other big titles, and publishers gradually became unwilling to greenlight their pet projects as a result. As a whole, Control flips the script on what to expect out of a Remedy title. Now, yeah, it does have the usual trademarks like great graphics, third-person shooting with a gimmick, and humorous references to Finnish culture, but that's really about it. Instead of linear chapters, Control takes place in a sprawling building known as the Oldest House, which is rife with interconnected areas, side quests, and fun hidden items for the player to explore at their own leisure. Because of the non-linear level design, the narrative is also lighter than previous titles. The focus is more about immersing the player into this weird, surreal world through exploration and interactivity, as opposed to just spilling it out in cutscenes. Jessie Faden is the most agile and capable of Remedy's protagonists, as she can levitate, slam, dash, fling objects, and do so much more without breaking a sweat. On the production side, Control had a much shorter turnaround and took about half the time to develop than their previous games. And while the publishing rights are exclusive to 505 Games, the intellectual property, that is, the characters, assets, and other things, are all fully owned by Remedy, which contrasts with previous titles like Max Payne, where Take-Two owns both the character and publishing rights. However, these are surface-level observations that I think most people would just notice right off the bat, especially if you've played another Remedy title. But what I think is more important are these 3 major details, all closely related to each other, that I feel strongly hammer home my belief that this is Remedy's way of reflecting on how they've got to this point and what they aspire to going forward. A recurring theme in Control is that of leadership change. The old guard of the Federal Bureau of Control, the organization at the heart of the story here, while incredibly skilled, they lacked transparency and were overconfident about their ability to protect the FBC, which inadvertently led to the Hiss invading. By the beginning of the game, most of the old bosses are either killed, taken over by the Hiss, or missing in action. Jessie unintentionally assumes the role of director and is obviously a fish out of water due to being a civilian. However, many of the FBC underlings that are still alive are also just as inexperienced for the jobs now left behind by their now deceased predecessors. Yet by the end, this new blood, Jesse, Simon, Emily, and plenty others, step up to take charge and hope to usher in a new era of leadership that avoids the mistakes of the past. In the real world, Matthias Meilerine, CEO of Remedy since the year 2000, stepped down in 2016 to be replaced by Tero Virtala, the former CEO of Redlinks, the Finland-based developers of the incredibly fun Trials series. With Virtala's appointment came a new shift in priorities, becoming a publicly traded company and moving to a more agile development process that allowed for multiple smaller projects to be produced in tandem rather than hyper-focusing on one thing for many years. Secondly, I think that Dylan Faden, Jesse's brother, is an allegory, wait for it, for Quantum Break. You see, Jesse and Dylan were both part of the Prime Candidate Program, an initiative set up by the FBC to scout for potential successors for the director role. While we don't know the exact number of candidates the FBC found, Jesse and Dylan were both codenamed P7 and P6, respectively. Project 7, or P7, was also the working title given to Control before its unveiling, in reference to the fact that it was Remedy's 7th major game, which makes Quantum Break the 6th. The FBC kidnapped Dylan while he was still young, hoping to take advantage of his paranatural abilities and groom him into the directorship role. But his powers were too unstable, erratic, and destructive, forcing the Bureau to contain him indefinitely. Quantum Break is a game about time collapsing upon itself in incredibly unstable, erratic, and destructive ways, and was a key title in Microsoft's efforts to move the Xbox brand beyond gaming and into film production. But it was a polarizing game with very middling sales, which resulted in Microsoft scrapping their TV initiative for good. And the last piece of the puzzle? Well, both Control and Quantum Break were built using Remedy's in-house engine, Northlight, but also the paranatural entity that saved Jesse and Dylan as children and is also the source of Jesse's powers is called Polaris. Polaris is another name for the North Star. Okay, I'm gonna stop the video again, I guess, to point out something else that I forgot to mention in the original script and recording. It's worth pointing out that Sean Dury, who plays Dylan Faden in Control, also served as the face model and voice actor for Jack Joyce in early prototypes of Quantum Break, before Sean Ashmore before Sean Ashmore was casted for the role. If I remember correctly, actually I think he was already casted, but he just wasn't available at the time they were making the prototype, so they just got Sean Dury to do the animation work for it. It's whatever. I just wanted to point this out because this actually ties into the next upcoming section of this video, and also just adds more fuel to my theory that Dylan was a allegory for Quantum Break, but whatever. Let's get back to the video. In short, I think Control is Remedy's way of making up for Quantum Break's missteps. It keeps what people liked about Quantum Break, the weird setting, the mesmerizing visuals, and environmental destruction, while improving the combat dramatically and keeping the player focused on the gameplay and not watching TV episodes. And the last point I'd like to mention is the totally intentional casting choices. Most of the main cast are voiced by returning alumni from previous Remedy games. Jesse and Dylan are voiced by Courtney Hope and Sean Dury, who played Beth Wilder and Nick Marsters in Quantum Break. Dr. Casper Darling is portrayed by Matthew Peretta, the voice of Alan Wake, but the most important one of all, in my opinion, is James McCaffrey, voice actor of Max Payne, as ex-director Zachariah Trench. Despite being killed off very early in the game, Trench is with Jesse throughout, speaking to her from the dead as he shares advice on the secrets of the Bureau, his relations with other staff, and his deepest regrets. The Prime Candidate program was set up because Trench knew that he wasn't infallible, and that someday someone will need to take his place, should he ever fall. Trench is a man that's proud of what he's accomplished, but ultimately hopes that Jesse doesn't make the same mistakes he did. This is why I don't think it was coincidental that they picked James McCaffrey for this role. On the surface, Trench is mentoring new blood to become the new director and to stop the hiss, but I think metaphorically it's Remedy having Max Payne, a old icon of their past, helping a new generation become the face of the company.
Same old story. That was a long time ago. The Bureau is all I have now, and the Prime Candidates are our future. There are two, P6 and P7. We're spoiled for choice.
Change, at least within the context of entertainment, is a very risky business. It can work out great and set a new standard, or it can be a catastrophic disaster that tanks your company. Change isn't explicitly good or bad, but it is necessary, because the reality is that your audience will change. People change. You learn new habits or maybe drop old ones. You get older. Your tastes change. You discover new things, etc. How many people do you know are the same as they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago? Any developer that wants to be more than a flash in the pan will have to adapt to an ever-evolving world around them, for better or worse. Change doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your soul, but you can't let yourself become complacent on previous successes. Remedy Entertainment is just at the beginning of a huge wave of change, and so far they're doing incredibly well. Control has sold over 2 million copies and has garnered heaps of praise from the press and gamers alike. They also have 2 new projects on the way: Vanguard, a multiplayer live service type of game, and Crossfire X, the Western release of a popular Korean FPS that Remedy will create the single-player campaign for. While many legendary developers have sadly left the industry over the course of 25 years, Remedy still stands tall with an exciting future ahead of them. Here's to 25 more.